Good morning, everyone. This is Karina Hill with the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. And on behalf of FADA, we want to welcome you to today's webinar, Gender-Specific Groups for Women with an Opioid Use Disorder with Gabriela Zapata Alma. And just a couple of housekeeping things. We do want to recognize the Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of DCF and FADA. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and will only be able to view your name. If you have questions, please send them to the presenter, myself, the host, and the presenter in the Q&A panel. Actually, it's best if you send it in the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Again, please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them, and the presenter will address them as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio, there are a few options to try on screen, and these options are posted in the chat panel too. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, you might want to try rejoining the webinar and call in using the telephone I will call in option. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation and also view it on screen as well to receive a certificate of attendance. So if you're calling in, please note that you also must be able to view it on screen in order to get credit for today's webinar. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on our website within 30 business days. We do try to have it posted sooner. We do also have a handout that's already posted on our site if you would like to go to fadaevents.webex.com. I did post the password in the chat panel. One helpful hint is the archived video displays what looks like to be an error message, but it's only a delay buffer. So you want to ignore it, hit play and enjoy. And so to access the recording in PowerPoint, you would go to www.fada.org and check out our Resource Center Training Library. FADA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the end of today's webinar, the web browser will direct everyone to an evaluation form on the FADA website. Your feedback is very important. You will first need to register or sign in to your account to complete the evaluation. So if you have not set up a profile with FADA, you need to do that so that you can complete the evaluation. Registering for the event is not the same as setting up your profile, so you need to do both. Information you provide FADA as part of registering remains confidential. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes. And right now, again, the evaluation closes on Friday, October the 16th. So your statement of credits will be posted within 30 days after it closes in your individual professional development journals for persons completing the evaluation and attending the full webinar. Again, you need to complete the evaluation and attend the full webinar. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. 1 to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinars. For persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Please note that WebEx does monitor your arrival and departure, and they provide us a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide contact hours or a certificate of attendance if you do not attend the entire webinar. Again, we are not permitted to provide partial credit. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Gabriela Zapata-Alma. She is the Director of Policy and Practice for Domestic Violence and Substance Use at the National Center for Domestic Violence, Trauma and Mental Health, as well as faculty at the University of Chicago. Gabriela brings 15 years of experience working with people living with HIV/AIDS, impacted by housing instability, substance use disorder, and mental health conditions, as well as survivors of domestic violence and other trauma, providing direct services, training, advocacy, and consultation, and leading programs using a trauma-informed approach, motivational interviewing, harm reduction, gender-responsive care, housing first, and third-wave behavioral interventions. Gabriela has provided technical assistance through SAMHSA and other national leaders in best practices. Gabriela has been recognized with numerous awards, including Health and Medicine Policy Research Group's 2018 Health Award and the Illinois Association of Addiction Professionals chapter of NADAAC's 2017 Rising Star Award. Gabriela has provided training and technical assistance related to serving marginalized communities impacted by trauma and other social detriments of health locally, nationally, and internationally. And now I would like to welcome our presenter, Gabriela, and I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks so much, Karina, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today, and of course, the Department of Children and Families for sponsoring this training, and the Florida Association for having me. I'm always happy to chat with y'all. Always glad to, offer up information and hear about the great work happening in Florida. Usually, I like to be able to. Oh, you know what? Let's see. How do I switch over to my slides?
You should see them now.
Let's see. I'm only seeing the intro slides.
Okay, let me take the control back.
Oh, wait, you know what? I just saw there's like a little tab going downwards. There we go. Okay, sorry about that, folks. And in earlier times, I loved coming in person to Florida as well and meeting many of you in person. So, but for now, we'll do it as safely as possible, of course. So today we're here to talk about gender-specific groups for women living with an opioid use disorder. So both the theoretical foundations as well as what evidence-based treatments exist and what they look like. And then you already heard a little bit about me, and here is my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me. And then a little bit about our center, the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. We're a special issue resource center dedicated to addressing the intersection of domestic violence, trauma, substance use, and mental health. So we have a lot of training and technical assistance resources. We conduct research and evaluation, policy development and analysis, and public awareness. And then here's my government disclaimer. So at the center, this is our integrated framework. So everything that we do is really rooted within this framework as the foundation. So always coming from a place of survivor-defined approaches, that people are the experts on their own lives, that people are at the center of defining their needs and their goals, and really are the ones who can, that we collaborate with in understanding what is safe for them in this moment, what is possible for them in this moment, and what they need in this moment. That all of this is built on physical and emotional safety, and that we use relational approaches so that it's really the healing really happens in relationship and in connection. And we hear this so often in our field, right? That we don't have a client until we have a relationship. And that our services must be able to foster hope and resilience. But so much of the healing is within that hope and resilience. And so with this as our core, we then are able to strive for a trauma-informed approach. an approach that takes an empowerment-based approach, which really comes from domestic violence and sexual violence advocacy. That we take a human rights and social justice-based approach that has an awareness of and responsiveness to cultural, historical, and community context. So here are learning objectives for today. As a result of participating in this session, you will be able to identify at least 4 gender-specific risk factors for opioid use disorder. You'll become familiar with at least 3 evidence-supported gender-specific group curricula for the treatment of opioid use disorder, and identify at least 2 strategies to increase gender-responsive services within your practice setting. So our first poll, first, just would love to hear your current role. So you should see that poll question has popped up. It might be on the side for you. And then if you could please just enter in kind of what's the closest way to describe your role. And of course, we still have another option if for some reason, you're in a role that is not at all reflected in any of these options. And we'll just give folks a few more seconds to go ahead and make a selection. And then if we can go ahead and close the poll so that we can see the results. And Karina, I'm not sure if you're able to, I'm not able to see the poll results. Are you able to see the poll results?
I don't think we can see them until the poll closes.
Oh, okay, great. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, you should see them now.
Perfect. So seems like, we have a fair amount of mental health clinicians and administrators here, as well as other. So for folks who are in the other category, if you could please in the chat just enter in your role so we can have a sense of kind of the setting and your role within the setting. And then also, I would say in the lead is no answer at all. So if you missed the poll and would still like to respond, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. Thanks, everyone. And then we have just one more poll for you to get a sense of whether you are currently offering women-specific groups. And so if we can go ahead and launch that poll. And then you'll see some different options there, from not offering women's groups yet, or groups maybe temporarily on hold, or you are offering women's groups, but they're more kind of general, or you're offering women's specific opioid use disorder group, or other. And thanks everyone who entered in the chat. I see we also have several case managers, as well as probation officers, as well as home visitors for healthy families. I'm so happy that y'all are here with us today. So going back to our polling, we'll just give you about 5 more seconds to respond, and then we'll go ahead and close the poll so we can see people's responses. All right, thanks everyone. So right now, Not offering groups is the kind of top option. But then I also see that many folks are offering women's general treatment groups. And so I'll be interested to hear, later on, for those who are offering groups, what kinds of groups you're offering, whether you're using any kind of specific curriculum. And then we'll be going over some different curriculums today. Thanks so much, everyone. So numerous studies have found that women have much better recovery outcomes when they have access to women-specific groups. So evidence has shown that women experience increased rates of retention in their services, tend to complete treatment at much higher rates, have a higher level of engagement in not only the group services, but actually kind of all the other services that are offered as part of their, as part of the setting and as part of their service plan, and that women report higher levels of satisfaction and a sense of progress, which we know that, when we feel that we are getting something out of our services and that we're really able to make progress towards our goals, that is so motivating, and it really helps build up our self-efficacy, our feeling that we can set goals and actually make progress towards them. And that's a really kind of technical way of just saying hope, building up our hope and building up our sense of empowerment, which we know is so important in recovery. So why do you think that women might experience better outcomes in women-specific groups? And go ahead and put some of your responses in the chat, and I will read them out loud so that folks can hear what you're typing. So why do you think that women would experience all of these better outcomes in women-specific groups?
So if you can make sure you're responding in the chat panel to host and presenter so that we both see your comments, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so Robin, absolutely. Women feel more comfortable opening up, especially if there has been a trauma. And we know that trauma history is very common for women in substance use disorder settings. I mean, different studies have found that anywhere from 55 to 99% of women have a history of trauma in substance use disorder settings. But they would be able to relate better to other group members. Absolutely, relatability, less judgment, more open to share, fewer inhibitions about sharing, absolutely, and more equal group dynamics. This is something that when we are facilitating co-ed groups, we have to be really attentive to the potential for power dynamics and how power dynamics can show up in the group setting. Absolutely. Not feeling as much stigma. So the stigma of substance use is huge. And the stigma of being a woman who uses substances is even greater. There's actually a kind of a compounded stigma. And then there are so many forms of stigma that get added on to that, such as being a woman who also parents or is pregnant and is living with a substance use disorder, or being a survivor of trauma. There's so many layers of stigma that can really impact women specifically. Women feeling more at ease and able to share with just women. There are many topics that women will only feel comfortable discussing in a group that is gender specific. And a lot of those topics, as you can imagine, are related both to trauma as well as to many of their recovery needs, including healthy relationships, a sense of belonging and reassurance, creating a safe place to disclose that felt sense of safety, potentially less distraction and more buy-in with peers. That it may be, with that shared experience, there may be not only more connectivity, but less having to kind of like explain some of the unique experiences that women tend to experience. Obviously, not all women are the same. We're not like just one big monolith of a group, but there are many experiences that are unique for women, and many women are common for women as well. But gender bias is so pervasive, and that, that it's something that many men may not experience or may not have kind of a frame for being able to understand. So the experience of all the bias that women experience as mothers, as someone who's living with a substance use disorder, and that how all of that unfolds in ways that are really traumatic. Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. Being able to form trust, especially for those who are trauma survivors, and that the need for self-protection is really valid, and it can be really protective for many women, obviously. Many women may be surviving because of that self-protection, but being able to really form those bonds of trust in a different way in a women-specific group, and a sense of community and understanding, and being more comfortable with other women who have a lot of the shared experiences. Thanks so much, everyone. So yeah, you all really, really got to the heart of why women-specific groups can be particularly important and healing, and are associated with so many improved outcomes. So as was mentioned in the chat, as well as there are many experiences that women are only going to feel comfortable discussing in women-specific groups, and there's really important areas to be able to talk and get support around, and really work through and access some, all the things that we do in treatment, right? The building of coping and the power of peer connection, right? And so some of these include sexuality and intimacy, traumatic experiences, parenting concerns, body image, and more. And so think about some of these topics, and as we go through the different group curricula, I want you to think about how are these different topics showing up in these manualized interventions? How are you seeing them addressed in the different evidence-based interventions that we'll be talking about? It's even so, on top of the great outcomes associated with women-specific groups, there's also many times a need to have groups that are not only women-specific, but are specifically designed to meet the needs of women who are pregnant and parenting young children. Because not only can there be the really exponential stigma there, but also so many specific needs and barriers and concerns that when you have a group that's specifically designed to really meet the needs of pregnant and parenting women, that then again we see those improved outcomes. And so thinking about, why is that, right? I keep saying the unique experiences of women. And so, women do have women tend to differ in the ways that they're introduced to substances, in the ways that there are different risk factors for developing substance use disorders, the negative effects of substance use, their access to resources, and then, of course, taking all of this into account, then their recovery needs also tend to be more gender specific. That said, of course, there's, we don't want to stereotype, we don't want to, put someone in a box or assume that we kind of know these different things about people before we actually are getting to know them. We still want to come from a place of openness, of always individualizing our services, So this is more so to understand what are some of those patterns and commonalities that tend to be more present in the experiences of women, and within that kind of perspective, also noting how many times traditional treatment has been based on men as clients and on men as kind of the neutral. So let me give you an example to highlight this. So a lot of what I do in my work is that I also provide training and technical assistance in domestic violence and sexual violence advocacy fields. And people, and domestic violence and sexual violence advocacy fields have been built around the needs of women. Those fields evolved around the needs of women. And so when I share with folks that in those fields that childcare is rarely available in substance use disorder treatment settings, they're shocked. And many times the feedback I get is, how can people expect women to attend treatment or participate in treatment if they aren't offering safe and stable childcare, right? And so, just one way to highlight how many times substance use disorder treatment and traditional treatment has been really based on men as clients rather than women as clients. So some of the sex-related risk factors, these are based on a lot of the kind of neurobiology and physiology of people who are assigned feminine sex at birth. And so here we know that there are certain neurobiological elements that actually make it the development of physiological dependence and substance use disorders tend to happen much more quickly. Kind of the neurobiological changes associated with substance use disorders tend to happen more quickly. We also know that there are some hormonal differences that can lead to more intense drug cravings, as well as experiencing increased drug effects, and that all of this then, of course, plays a role in an increased risk of a relapse or a return to use. There's also higher rates of co-occurring mental health concerns, including panic attacks, depression, anxiety, PTSD, personality disorders, and eating disorders. We also have seen in the evidence that women are much more likely to need emergency care, are more vulnerable to fatal overdose and substance-involved death, and may experience more physical effects on their cardiovascular health. So all of this points to a phenomenon known as the telescoping effect. And so the telescoping effect, simply put, is that women will use smaller amounts of substances for shorter amounts of time and experience higher rates of substance use disorders, higher rates of co-occurring concerns, including mental health, physical health, and other kinds of kind of social functioning problems much more quickly than male counterparts, and that they'll progress from that initial use to developing more of that physiological dependence much more quickly as well. And so here we're really seeing just the much more intense adverse consequences of substance use with really much shorter substance use histories and much smaller amounts of substances used. And here you just see different research citations for the more commonly used substances. Now, looking at gender-specific risk factors. So this has a lot more to do with kind of more of the gender roles and some of the more kind of social experiences of women. And so here we see gender, so this is less about, or neurobiology or physiology. And so here we see that women's risk factors for developing a substance use disorder tend to be somewhat unique when compared to male counterparts. So when there's substance use disorder in the family of origin, experiences of childhood physical or sexual abuse, or needing to take on, kind of adult roles or responsibilities as a child, many times what we talk about, like the parentification of children, that this tends to be a more salient risk factor for women then going on to developing a substance use disorder later in life. Experiences of assault and victimization, start from childhood all the way through adolescence and adulthood, divorce or relationship separation, the termination of parental rights and separation from children, and then experiences of grief, especially the loss of a partner or a child. We also see that women are more often introduced to substances by an intimate partner, and that intimate partners play a large role in both the initiation of substance use as well as the escalation from that initiation to a substance use disorder or substance use concerns. Studies have also shown that over a quarter of survivors of domestic violence have experienced pressure or coercion to use from an intimate partner or ex-partner. And this is one of the many abusive tactics common to a form of domestic violence known as substance use coercion. So, looking at relationships and ongoing substance use, particularly for women, we see that relationships influence substance use disorder treatment engagement, retention, and outcomes, that substance use may be used to address feelings of isolation and loneliness, and that a return to substance use or a return to chaotic use is many times associated with internal distress, relationship conflict, or more specifically, substance use coercion. So speaking specifically about domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence. So experiences of domestic violence are prevalent among people experiencing substance use disorder treatment, and the abusive tactics used many times seek to sabotage survivors' recovery as well as sabotage their access to treatment. So looking at particularly the experiences of women, there's high rates of DV among women accessing substance use disorder treatment. So research has found that 47 to 90% of women report experiencing domestic violence in their lifetime. This is specifically in treatment settings. And the upper range of this, the 90% range of this, was actually that was found specifically in opioid treatment programs. So something to keep in mind there. And then looking at just domestic violence in the past year, which many times people who have experienced domestic violence in the past year are still at risk for domestic violence, for stalking, for ongoing attacks and assaults. That here, anywhere from a third to 2/3 of women in our treatment services are experiencing this ongoing domestic violence. So looking more at some of the tactics and experiences of substance use coercion, and I apologize if the infographic on the right is teeny tiny writing. I will be sure to go through it and read through it. And you may also be able to enlarge the screen on your end. So this was a study that we did in partnership with the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And so people who were included in this study were not pre-screened for substance use. They were not pre-screened for somebody who either had a history of substance use or currently used substances. These were just general callers to the hotline who were not in an active crisis at the time and consented to be a part of the research study. So 26% of callers reported that they had used substances to reduce the pain of domestic violence, of the abuse. And we probably see this a lot in our settings, right? That people use substances to really deal with the effects of trauma. That 27% had been pressured or forced to use substances or made to use more than they wanted. 24% were afraid to call the police because their partner said that they would be arrested or not believed. And we hear time and time again how survivors call the police seeking safety, and many times the abusive partner is able to convince police not to believe the survivor, and many times will blame the survivor's substance use. And then the survivor will be in even more danger because now they've called the police, but they haven't gotten the safety that they needed. And we hear this time and time again from both domestic violence programs as well as from survivors. And then 38% said that their partner had threatened to report their substance use to authorities to prevent them from getting something they wanted or they needed, such as an order of protection or custody of their children or being able to get a job or being able to get support from friends and family. So we know that isolation is part of the pattern of domestic violence, and when substances are involved in that isolation, becomes so much easier because of the stigma related to substance use. Of those who had tried to get some kind of help around their substance use, either attending treatment or attending some kind of mutual aid like 12-step or some other form of mutual aid, 60% said that their partner or ex-partner had tried to prevent or discourage them from getting help. So something that we need to be aware of as providers is not only the fact that many women who use opioids who are living with opioid use disorder and accessing our programs, not only might they be experiencing either the traumatic effects of domestic violence or ongoing danger due to domestic violence, they may also be experiencing treatment interference and recovery sabotage from a partner or ex-partner. So here we see, we've also found how substance use coercion is used to entrap women, and particularly women who use opioids and other substances, in dangerous relationships, in abusive relationships. So here, many times we have seen, and has been reflected in the research, the supplying of substances to survivors. Many times this is done under the guise of an apology for abuse. It's also, we've heard time and time again of people, coming home from treatment and the abusive partner having substances all around the home or having paraphernalia all around the home. And that this is actively seeking to really trigger the neurobiology of relapse, right? So that they can then continue to attempt to exert power and control over the survivor. We've also heard about controlling survivors' access to substances. I remember speaking with one survivor who shared with me that the abusive partner that it was as if she had been, quote, marked as property, end quote, of the abusive partner. And that when she was experiencing withdrawal and was trying to leave the abusive partner, but wasn't able to get into any kind of withdrawal management services, and she tried to get some substances from just, the street, that she wasn't able to get substances anywhere, that no one would supply her with substances because she had been, quote, marked as property of the abusive partner. And that this all then was the abusive tactic to then keep her entrapped in the abusive relationship. And so we see, particularly wherever there is the threat of withdrawal, that then the substances very easily are used as a mechanism of abuse and control. And that this then is used many times to force survivors into illegal activities. There's a huge overlap here with human trafficking and with sexual trafficking as well. also has been reflected threatening to report survivors' substance use to law enforcement or child protective services. And then, of course, using the substance use history, including using treatment records against survivors in legal matters, especially child custody. So there's a lot here that goes into being DV informed and providing services that are safe and accessible for survivors. So we can see all of the complex threats that women living with opioid use disorders face, right? That it's not just the opioids, that there's a lot more going on potentially. Some other ways that substance use coercion comes up is not, withholding transportation, withholding childcare, withholding financial resources for treatment. So something that some people have done is be able to put together grants to cover the cost of treatment when people aren't able to access their insurance coverage or their financial resources because of the, substance use coercion. And the withholding of transportation and childcare, sometimes it's very overt and obvious, and other times it's very kind of insidious. So sometimes it's, I remember as a treatment provider, someone wouldn't show up for an appointment and we'd call and find out how, what was going on and how they were doing. And they would share with us that their partner had taken off with a car, and that even though the partner had said they could use the car, that their partner was nowhere to be found, and that they didn't have a way to get there, right? Or that their partner had taken off with their bus card. So a lot of times it can be very insidious and easily overlooked if we're not savvy to these tactics of abuse. And many providers who are gender responsive then have found ways to put resources in place to make sure that there's transportation resources and childcare resources, because many times not only do women just need these because of reduced access to resources, but also because even when they may have these resources, they then get blocked from accessing these resources because as a tactic of control. And that we also found that the controlling of medication, stealing of medication, and using medications to coerce or control was very common. And here medications many times were the medication-assisted treatment as well as mental health medications. So part of really needing, kind of being aware of the needs of women are also being aware of whether they are able to maintain control of their medication, or if somebody is trying to really exert power and control over them through taking control of their medication, and then safety planning with them to really support them being able to have access to their medication and take it as prescribed. And that this really, in order to really show up for women in these ways, we have to be able to move past the common suspiciousness around medication diversion. And it's not to say that we don't still, we aren't still aware of medication diversion, or we aren't still kind of asking about it or trying to put in some supportive structures. But that we need to be really careful that we're not just jumping to conclusions and assuming that somebody is diverting their medication, because very often what may be happening is actually much more about domestic violence that person is experiencing. So women living with a substance use disorder, research has found that they often have fewer social and economic resources as compared to their male counterparts, and that they're more likely to have children in their care. So reduced resources plus more actual responsibilities and needs. So we can see how this becomes a situation where it becomes really difficult to access treatment resources, and that recovery resources are going to be a little bit different than what our traditional treatment settings have kind of defined as the scope of our services. And so women's multifaceted recovery needs often require more comprehensive and holistic approaches because of the combined burdens of work, of home care, of child care, other family responsibilities, economic hardship, increased co-occurring concerns, potential for domestic violence. How all of these result in complex barriers that our treatment systems may or may not be designed to really address. Now here, there is a potential for telehealth to be a really important resource. And that telehealth can help expand access for many women. There's also some potential safety needs that need to be taken into account, like the potential for an abusive partner to be listening in on a telehealth session. So there may be some additional needs to work into telehealth, but that said, telehealth can be a great way to expand access. So given all of the unique needs of women and women living with substance use disorders, what are some of the ways that your services respond to women's unique realities? And I invite everyone to go ahead and put your responses in the chat, and I'll be sure to read them out loud. So what have you built in to your practice settings, to your services, that can help address some of these complex barriers and are responsive to the unique risk factors that women experience? So offering access to a female therapist, absolutely. It's been found that when women have the choice of having a feminine identified therapist, that this really is associated with better recovery outcomes. Our agency has a campus for women and their children, so really having those dedicated spaces and services, bringing services directly to their homes. Home-based services can be so important for women. Having specific services for pregnant and parenting women and gender-specific groups and childcare provided. Yes, you can't see me, but I'm applauding. I'm like soft clapping right now. Providing individual counseling sessions and providing social skills through worksheets. That for many women, having access to individual counseling in addition to groups would be really important. Having residential programming that is women only and is family focused, that children are welcome to attend and have childcare. Providing referrals to women only programs and groups. Yes, so for folks who are not in formal treatment settings, feel free to think about, the ways that your services are responsive to women's needs. And that may be through referral, absolutely. And here, Nancy shares, as a trainer, I've enlisted help of addiction specialists and OBGYNs to provide training on pregnant women with opioid use disorder to help reduce stigma. Excellent. There's so much stigma, and there's so many pregnant women living with opioid use disorder who get turned away from formal treatment resources, or get turned away from, I can think of a really tragic case here in my home state of Illinois where a pregnant woman didn't know where to go and went to an emergency room seeking some kind of treatment service because she was pregnant and she wanted to stop using opioids. And everywhere she called, she was getting turned away. And the emergency room told her that they didn't know where to send her either. And she ended up overdosing. So there's so much stigma and so much lack of information and training around how to meet the needs of women who are pregnant and using opioids. And frankly, it's not that difficult to learn. I treated pregnant women with opioid use disorder all day long when I was a treatment provider. So a lot of times it's about the stigma, right? Because we learn how to do complex things all the time. I'm really happy to hear that that you are enlisting addiction specialists and OB-GYNs to provide this training. It's so wonderful. And we've also heard about the power of including people with lived experience in those trainings as well. Connecting clients with peer specialists, perfect segue, with peer specialists and providing women a specific campus for them. So there's a lot of research finding that the power of the peer specialist, and many times, specifically for women, that this has been really an important resource and support. And there's some specific research that's found that women who many times women who experience high levels of emotional dysregulation, who many times end up, having difficulty remaining engaged in some of our treatment services, that when they were engaged through peer-based interventions, they not only were retained in those services, but then, of course, had much better outcomes. So peer specialists are such important parts of our overall teams and offerings and resources as fields, and particularly for women who may not end up connecting with a counselor, many times will be better served potentially by a peer specialist. And then, working with groups of women that, having a lot of relational work there, relational approaches, absolutely. That healing happens in relationship, and that many times that hurt also happens in relationship. So in understanding how to be responsive to the needs of women, we have to understand that relationship poses both the promise of healing and the challenges of connection when our trust has been betrayed in the past, right? With that surviving interpersonal trauma. So really understanding that as part of the healing. Thanks, everyone. And then it goes without saying, but I need to say it, of course, that medication-assisted treatment and overdose prevention services are highly evidence-based, probably the most evidence-based thing that we have in the treatment of opioids, and that this is especially true for anyone who is pregnant and in that post-pregnancy phase, and that medication-assisted treatment is life-saving in the treatment of opioid use disorder, and that many times stigma keeps people from being able to access MAT. And so this is how we see that stigma is literally lethal. And that when we are talking about life-saving treatment, MAT should never be contingent on group participation. People should never be cut off from a life-saving medication because they haven't attended a group. So just to make that really, really clear. And then we have a couple minutes for questions before we take our 5-minute midway break. And so I see a question here. Have you seen fewer people come for treatment and help since COVID-19? So there's absolutely been, just so many increased barriers to treatment, so many different complex barriers to accessing treatment since the pandemic started, as well as, of course, increased needs for treatment because of all of the, just all the tragedy, all the grief, all the isolation, the depression, right? All the things that kind of come along with the pandemic, the job loss, etc. So we're definitely in a situation where we're seeing increased needs and reduced access. And that we need to be really creative and innovative with the ways that we're doing outreach and the ways that we are trying to reach people, and particularly people who may be, sheltering in place or self-quarantining with an abusive partner. That we've all seen the news reports of domestic violence increasing both in frequency and in severity. And so it's really important for us to be coming together and collaborating and figuring out ways to reach people, because the barriers are absolutely increasing and the need is also increasing. And we know that this is really a recipe for tragedy in so many different ways. So with that, we are at time for our break. So folks, could please come back in 5 minutes. Please come back on the hour at 11 o'clock. Thanks so much. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. So now we're going to move into looking at evidence-based gender-responsive groups for women living with opioid use disorder. And after this piece, we'll also talk about evidence-supported. So the difference between evidence-based and evidence-supported typically is that evidence-based has just much more research attached to it, and that the research has been replicated, and the evidence just is of a much kind of stronger quality. And whereas evidence-supported is usually more so that they're using methods that are evidence-based, and that the approaches themselves have had some testing and evaluation and research, but not like large-scale studies, and haven't had like a lot of replication. So just a little clarifying piece for some jargon there. So with evidence-based, we're going to be looking at seeking safety and helping women recover. So seeking safety, here I have a citation for a meta-analysis if you are interested in looking at the research. And I'd love to hear from y'all if you want to put in the chat what your experiences have been using seeking safety, or what people have heard about seeking safety, just to get a sense of your experience of it. So this is a manualized group curricula that can also be used one-on-one. It's a present-focusing counseling model, so it focuses on the here and now and really the future, rather than diving into the past and unpacking the past as much. There are 25 topics that can really be covered in any order, and it includes handouts for both the person facilitating it as well as the participants. So I'll say seeking safety has good evidence, particularly it's been tested with women and women living with substance use disorders, including opioids, and who are also survivors of trauma. And that seeking safety treats substance use disorder and trauma in an integrated fashion. So it's a treatment for both those concerns. It's also been tested with men and found to be useful. It's been tested with the samples, population samples in research are racially diverse, which is really important to note because that's not always the case. And it also has been tested with veterans and been found effective. So just to highlight some of the populations it's been found effective for. So the goals are to address and reduce symptoms of the trauma as well as substance use disorder, and to increase safe coping in relationships, thinking, behavior, and emotions. The session format is typically there's a check-in, then they start by reading a quotation out loud or having it written and reading it out loud. Then they'll discuss that session's kind of content and the participants' experiences. And then there's a lot of handouts and facilitated discussion. There's a lot of kind of key learning points and kind of pointers for the facilitator, as well as some examples for if there's kind of some tough situations that might come up in group related to that session topic. And so in that way, it's manualized in a way that can be really supportive for the facilitator. And then, of course, the group will end with a checkout. In seeking safety, there are a set of principles, and then there is a theoretical stages of recovery. And sorry, my text I got a little bit warped there in the translation. So the stages of recovery, it first builds on safety. Then from there, mourning, so kind of the healthy processing of grief, right? And then from there, reconnection. And the principles of seeking safety are safety as an overarching goal. So helping people and services to attain safety in their relationships, safety in their thinking, in their behavior, and in their emotions. And then that the principle of integrated treatment, so working on both trauma and substance use at the same time. And we can see why when we look at the high rates of experiences of trauma amongst women in substance use disorder treatment. And then a focus on ideals. This is really to counteract the loss of ideals that happens in both trauma and substance use. And that this is done in those 4 content areas. So cognitive, so that of the thoughts, behavioral, interpersonal, so having to do with relationships, and then case management. And then an attention to clinician processes, meaning really an awareness and attention to ourselves as the facilitator, what's coming up for us, what are our emotional responses, and what self-care are we putting in place. So here's a list of the interpersonal topics, so you can get a sense of some of the things that are covered. And keeping in mind when we talked about what are some of those topics that women will likely only discuss in women-specific groups, right? And what are some of the overlaps you're seeing here? What are some of the themes you're seeing emerge? And here I want to highlight the importance of the healing from anger piece. That many times the message that women receive both explicitly and implicitly is that their anger is not justified. And that many times the anger is, I tend to call it more righteous indignation, because it's an anger that comes from having been victimized, from having been abused. And that anger is a really natural response to experiences of being victimized, of being abused. And so here, really, not seeing anger as a problem or an issue, and at the same time, because anger is so stifled for women in so many ways, being able to bring healing around that anger, both in being able to facilitate healthy expressions of anger, as well as being able to heal kind of beyond that experience. And the cognitive topics. Here is an example of the cognitive topic of compassion. And there is a lot of sample topics available at this link. If you want to get a sense of what one of the sessions looks like, they've made different sessions available so that people can have that. So the compassion topic here explores how that harsh self-talk can be connected to the substance use disorder and to the trauma, and then really invites people into that self-compassion and helps them foster that self-compassion as a part of the healing and the growth. And that a part of this session topic is helping people to reflect on that self-talk while also building in ways to increase that self-compassion. And we know that so often in trauma, that sense of guilt and that harshness with oneself, it's literally in the criteria of symptoms for PTSD, right? So this comes up so much, especially in the context of stigmatized substance use. And so here is a quote of one of the ways that they kind of support reflection on self-talk, which is, if I were really listening to my deepest needs, what would I say to myself? Right? So that was just kind of a taste of seeking safety. So now, moving into helping women recover. This comes from Stephanie Covington, and is, again, highly evidence-based. And this is another set of group curricula that could also be used individually, and has been tested with women who are, this is also a program for substance use disorder that's been tested with women who are living with opioid use disorder, as well as women with other kinds of substances and substance use disorders. And this has also been tested in criminal legal settings, and there is a criminal justice edition of helping women recover. And so this is something that if you are working in any kind of criminal legal setting or with this population, or populations who have these experiences, that you may want to look into the addition that's specific for criminal justice. And this has also been tested with racially diverse population samples. So the goals of helping women recover are stabilizing recovery, increasing self-efficacy, decreasing the symptoms of depression, trauma, and substance use disorder, and increasing an understanding of trauma. That many times when people, that psychoeducation of trauma has been found really evidence-based for decreasing symptoms of trauma. And the focus areas here are the self, relationships, sexuality, and spirituality. So again, think about some of the pieces that we talked about earlier on that many times women would only, that were really important part of women's recovery, but that women would likely only feel comfortable talking about in a women-specific group, right? So thinking about that here. And so, but here are the topics in the self module. So defining self, a sense of self, self-esteem, sexism, stereotyping, and power. And then each of the different kind of core components of helping women recover also comes with it mind-body practices. And that, so for this segment, there is breath of joy to ragdoll to lip flutter. And if we were in person, I'd probably have everyone kind of stand up and we do it all together. But I'll spare you in the virtual environment. But keeping in mind that many times the body is really the place where we're storing so much of our trauma. And so in integrating some mind-body practices, we are using bottom-up approaches to addressing trauma. And so the combination of both the talk therapy approaches, many times called top-down approaches, combining that with the body-based approaches, with the bottom-up approaches can be really helpful for addressing trauma integrated with substance use. And I'd love to hear in the chat any experiences that people have with helping women recover with this group curriculum. So now we are going to try out one of the activities from helping women recover. And so many times we are often defined as our relationship to others or our role. But that doesn't actually tell us much about ourselves. So I want to invite everyone to reflect on how would someone have described you when you were 10 years old. So take some time to think back to when you were around that age, kind of like 4th, 5th grade, around there. And how would somebody have described you then? And then think about a few words that describe you today that are not a relationship or a role. And I invite everyone to share those in the chat. And I'll read some of them out loud. I always love getting to know folks a little more through this. So like happy, carefree, friendly. At 10 years old, adventurous, creative, and thoughtful. Determined, inquisitive, artistic. Short, quiet, stoic. Strong, independent, smart. At 10, outspoken and talkative. Energized, funny, and spontaneous. Shy, outgoing, considerate. Happy. Social, passionate, helper. Thanks, everyone. Always thinking outside the box. Thanks, everyone. So you can see how, in experiences of opioid use disorder and in trauma, so much of the organization of our identity can really become organized centering the substance use disorder and a trauma. And so within this curriculum, really helping people to reclaim that sense of self beyond the opioid use disorder, beyond the trauma. And then the topics in the relationships module. We see here pieces around family of origin, mothers, mother myths, fathers, right? And the understanding of abuse and trauma, interpersonal violence, and creating supportive and loving relationships. And then the mind-body practice is the feminine warrior sequence. So we're starting to see, right, a reflection of all of those kind of salient risk factors for developing substance use disorders that women tend to experience that aren't always included or attended to in traditional treatment that is really focused on kind of men as clients. And so now we're going to play a short video that shows actually Stephanie Covington facilitating one of the sessions. So Karina, do I press something or do you help me make the video happen? Okay, thank you.
Coming up now.
Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm sorry to see that some folks weren't able to hear it, so I'm really sorry about that. And thank you, Karina, for putting the link in the chat. I hope folks will have time to watch it at some point. And so so that is just an example of how really unpacking, and you can see how the session is both psychoeducational, but then also very experiential for people as they learn about their families of origin and how that may have, maybe impacting them today still, while also creating a vision for what they want their future to be, what they want their families to be. And so looking at the other core components, there is a piece around sexuality and then also spirituality. And so, this here, we can start to see how, particularly for people who may have experienced both opioid use disorder and trauma, how these pieces are really central to recovering from both of those experiences. And that if we kind of leave these unattended, if we kind of turn away or ignore these things, then that can really have some repercussions down the road for ongoing recovery, as as these problems kind of continue to come up if they're not, if we don't provide some support and some services around them. Then there's also beyond trauma. And beyond trauma can be used in combination with helping women recover. There's a way to just put them together, or it can also be used as a standalone for trauma. And so if you're in a setting that is maybe not substance use specific, but there are folks that are experiencing the effects of trauma, this can be a great group curricula. Or if you are in substance use disorder treatment and there's already a whole lot of robust programming around substance use disorder treatment, but you're looking for something that is specific for the trauma, this can also be a great option. And so this is 12 sessions. It's a manualized curriculum, and it's based on the principles of relational therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques, mindfulness, expressive arts, and body-oriented exercises. And each session also has an adaptation for adolescent girls as well. So what are the requirements for being able to either access this kind of program as a person in services, or to facilitate either helping women recover or seeking safety as a staff person? So for staff, there's actually no formal education or licensure requirement. So these can be facilitated by counselors, can also be facilitated by case managers and by peer specialists. There's really no formal kind of level of licensure or education required. That said, if somebody does want to get formal training in one of these approaches, the creators of these approaches do offer that. So there are resources around that. And then who's eligible to attend Seeking Safety or helping women recover? And so actually people don't need to have a formal diagnosis in order to attend these groups. So, as long as somebody is seeking some kind of support and help around substance use and, past experiences of trauma, or really just substance use in general, but there's likely to be some past experiences of trauma, these are fine interventions to use. And so you don't have to feel like you need to do a whole lot of pre-screening of people to make sure that they meet criteria for PTSD or that they meet criteria for a substance use disorder per se. Unless, of course, you're billing insurance, and then that's built into your structure anyway. So I'd love to see in the chat, what are some common elements that you noticed between seeking safety and helping women recover? What's some of the overlap there? go ahead and put your responses in the chat, and we'll read those out loud. Body awareness, looking at family systems, self-esteem, recognizing roles that are played, both use hope. Both really help foster hope and how that is so important in building motivation. They're holistic, self-awareness, that there's kind of a multi-pronged approach with addressing behavior, thinking, trauma, and other kinds of issues. Understanding the impacts of the environment on substance use. Yeah, thanks everyone. So we can see that they share a lot in common. Now, there are many, so when it comes to addressing the unique needs of people who are survivors of domestic violence or relationship-based violence, there are some additional pieces that we want to be aware of and that we want to be able to add in. And so when we think about integrated treatments for trauma and opioid use disorder, many of them are going to focus on past trauma. Only a handful will have kind of that current attention to safety planning, right? So here we also need to think about what's needed to support people for whom the trauma is not post, right? There is still active danger. And so we conducted a systematic review and found that these 5 core elements can be added to existing evidence-based practices to really increase their responsiveness for survivors of domestic violence. So first, psychoeducation about the causes and consequences of intimate partner violence and the potential for traumatic effects. 2, awareness of mental health and substance use coercion. So really using a person's mental health or substance use against them in tactics of abuse, as well as sabotaging their recovery efforts. 3, an attention to ongoing safety. 4, a focus on cognitive and emotional coping skill development that can help address trauma-related symptoms and support them in their goals. And then finally, of course, a focus on survivor strengths, as well as both their individual strengths as well as cultural strengths and affirmation of cultural identity on which they draw. So, a lot of times there just hasn't been enough research that has been done formally with survivors of domestic violence. Actually, many times survivors of domestic violence have been excluded from research. Like that's been a disqualifying. But that said, helping women recover and seeking safety, as well as some of the other group curricula I'm going to speak about, have been tested with survivors of domestic violence and have been found effective. And that is particularly important when we look at the high rates of domestic violence in substance use disorder treatment settings, especially for women living with an opioid use disorder. And then I want to just name this resource. We have an online repository of intimate partner violence specific interventions, which are trauma-focused interventions specifically for survivors of intimate partner violence. So now looking at promising practices, and just going to kind of give a snapshot of each of these I'm not going to go into as much depth as we did with seeking safety and helping women recover. So the trauma recovery and empowerment model, it's based on this. So let me back up. This has promising evidence with trauma outcomes, but more mixed results with substance use disorder and opioid use disorder outcomes. It consists of three major parts. The first section is on empowerment. So this is all about learning strategies for self-comfort, as well as being able to kind of understand how we're feeling, what helps us feel safe, being able to differentiate between trauma symptoms and, necessary vigilance that is helping us escape danger, and also helps folks establish safe physical and emotional boundaries. The second component, trauma, focuses directly on trauma experience and its consequences. And then the third focuses on skill building. So here, emphasizing communication style, decision making, regulating feelings, and then establishing safer and more reciprocal relationships. Group facilitators don't necessarily have to have a specific license or education, but should have a background in group work. And this is really a combination of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and psychoeducation. So the Boston Consortium model, this model builds on TREM and then builds in additional modules. And this came out of a consortium of different providers in Boston, hence the name. And this was really people coming together to both adapt and create something that would be more responsive to the unique realities of women of color who also experience low or no income and live primarily in urban settings. And it was developed and tested in both English and Spanish. One thing that is different about this model is that it has one primary point of contact that provides support and coordination across all the different services. So really having that kind of centralized care coordinator who is trauma informed and aware of the different resources and can form really that kind of like that ongoing relational bond with someone as they move in and out of different services they may need. And then the 5 modules include those that are in TREM with 3 added sessions on HIV prevention. And that the HIV prevention piece was added in because it has been found that women survivors of trauma are at increased risk of HIV. Then it also builds in a peer-delivered Women's Leadership Training Institute, finding that many times when women are engaged in leadership training and engaged by their peers in this, that actually has healing effects when it comes to the substance use and the trauma. So really thinking about that empowerment model. Adding economic stability pieces, also adding pieces around navigating family reunification and recovery, as well as additional family-focused components in the nurturing program for families. And then here, also reflecting on culturally responsive services. And so when it comes to facilitating group therapy, looking at what is culturally responsive, potentially promising practices and strategies for culturally responsive services for African American women. And this comes from the SAMHSA tip. And so here, these are pieces that could be really layered on to any of these group curricula. And so if you are working with a population, either that you're working with this population, or if you're seeing that Black women in your services are not experiencing as good outcomes in your treatment services. And that is a really important indicator that the services need to be better adapted to meet the needs of Black women in your treatment. And so here are some ideas that can be useful in that culturally specific adaptation. And then this is a group curricula that was created collaboratively with community members, and it was specifically tailored to respond to the needs and realities of Black and Latina survivors of intimate partner violence with low income who are accessing services in an urban opioid treatment program. This was something that was delivered within a methadone program. And so the materials and exercises incorporate social, cognitive, and skill-building approaches. So things that include like coping strategies, boundary setting, negotiation, and communication skills, and also kind of have a lot of interactive learning styles and include things like games, brainstorming, role-playing, and small group discussion to really build that group cohesion. Sessions also included traditional and contemporary Black and Latina references to include cultural sources of pride and resilience. And so this is a format that can be really, that you may want to consider if you are looking for an intervention that is going to be more culturally responsive for people living in these kinds of communities, like urban communities, people experiencing low income, and people who are Black and Latina, women who are Black and Latina. And then there is the Women's Recovery Group. Now, the Women's Recovery Group is 14 sessions, and something that is really helpful about this group or noteworthy is that it's been tested in an open or rolling group format, which we know a lot of times it can be really hard for treatment centers to have closed groups. And that we also want to think about what's been evidence-based or what has some positive evidence of being effective in that open group format. So when this was compared to co-ed groups, so when the women-only group was compared to co-ed groups, they found similar recovery outcomes at the completion of group, but better recovery outcomes long-term. So meaning that the positive gains in recovery from treatment were maintained, were more likely to be maintained in the long term when this was delivered in a women-specific group. So this group curricula is focused largely on relapse prevention and repair work. And so in the relapse prevention, a lot of what is classically included in relapse prevention, such as identifying cues for use, right, the people, places, things, and identifying those high-risk situations, making a plan to avoid those high-risk situations, as well as developing coping skills to deal with those unavoidable situations, how to create a, quote, trigger-free environment, and then, of course, accessing treatment or potentially re-engaging in treatment if and when there is a return to use or a return to chaotic use, a use that isn't aligned with our recovery goal. And then the, quote, repair work pieces focus on repairing damaged relationships as well as, and here it's the relationship not just with others, but also the damage that we sustained in the relationship with ourselves. And then also pieces around learning to enjoy life in recovery. So really building that life of recovery. And so this might be a group curricula that can be particularly useful once people have entered more or are crossing over into more of that maintenance stage of change, so maybe kind of later action and maintenance stage, as they are working into really moving into that continuing recovery phase of their recovery journey. Then there are also some promising applications of third wave behavioral interventions when it comes to group-based treatment for women living with opioid use disorder. This is still in the early phases, hence it being still just promising. So I included these more so in case you are already practicing these within your setting. So if you are a mental health or substance use counselor and you're already using acceptance and commitment therapy, then seeing how you can apply it to opioid use disorder. And that can really enhance any kind of integrated care as well around mental health and substance use care. As we know, women are much more likely to experience those co-occurring concerns. So the early promising evidence suggests that acceptance and commitment therapy can be similarly effective as cognitive behavioral therapy and 12-step facilitation. And then there was also a study that looked at outcomes for women in criminal legal settings. And what they looked at was CBT versus ACT, meaning acceptance and commitment therapy, versus a wait list. And what the study found was that at post-treatment, CBT was more effective than ACT in reducing anxiety, but that at follow-up, ACT was more effective than CBT in reducing drug use and improving overall mental health. So that's just results from one study in a very specific setting. But that said, that was only women with opioid use disorder in that study. So it's certainly something that shows some promise in using acceptance and commitment therapy, but still more research is needed. And then looking at dialectical behavioral therapy. So here there is an adaptation of DBT that is specific for substance use disorders. And it's been primarily tested with women living with a substance use disorder, including opioid use disorder, and a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. It's very similar to original DBT, if that's something that you're already familiar with. So there's weekly individual and group sessions, phone-based coaching, and consultation teams. But the adaptation is that it has added attention to skill building that is specific to recovery. So things like relapse prevention planning, for example. And also has some added focus on engagement and retention in treatment as well. So a classic example here from DBT is the skill of coping ahead, and that this skill in DBT-SED is specifically adapted for continuing recovery planning. And then there's also a lot of attention around applying the acceptance skills of DBT to substance use recovery. And something that can be helpful about this is that while it is an abstinence-based model, it also takes a very pragmatic and acceptance-based approach that understanding that harm reduction is very useful and necessary, and that harm reduction is really important in the non-judgmental problem solving. And so in this way can also be much more responsive to the kind of ongoing experiences of women who may have also experienced trauma. So a common question that comes up is, would this be helpful for people who do not have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder? And so Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, What she offers is that while DBT SUD may be helpful, it's also important to first consider whether there's another intervention that is better suited to the person's needs, and that if they can experience good outcomes in a program that is less intensive. Because as you can tell, there are a lot of moving parts in DBT. But that said, as a treatment provider, when I was a formal treatment provider running intensive outpatient, we did use DBT because of so many people in our program experiencing really lifetimes of trauma and experiencing, if not a kind of full diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, certainly experiencing some of the symptoms. And so found this to be really effective, just speaking from my experience as a treatment provider, when I did already have a robust programming in place as is needed in an intensive outpatient. And then last but not least, mindfulness-based parenting intervention. So this is 2 hours a week for 12 weeks. And as you see, here's just a selection of some of the different group topics and teaching methods, and then some of the practice and process. And so anywhere where you see MC, that means mother and child. And so these have been tested at nestled within a treatment center. And so the curriculum incorporated mother and baby together, education and practice, including building knowledge around the impact of trauma on parenting, as well as helping people learn short mindfulness practices. So some of the major themes involved listening with full attention, non-judgmental acceptance, emotional awareness of self and child, self-regulation, and compassion for self and child. And this has been tested and being delivered in opioid treatment programs. So this can be a really promising add-on service if you're considering offering a group that is specifically for pregnant and parenting women living with opioid use disorder. This might be a really great group curriculum to look more into and consider offering. And so I want to hear from y'all. What specific groups are you currently offering or considering offering in your own settings in order to support women living with opioid use disorder? And then as you all kind of go ahead and put that in the chat, I just want to summarize some of the takeaways from today. That women have unique strengths, needs, and experiences. That addressing barriers to treatment is crucial. That no matter what kind of curricula or service we are offering, addressing those barriers is really paramount. That gender-responsive services are better equipped to support women in their recovery goals. Women tend to experience better outcomes when they can access women-specific groups, and that there are several evidence-based as well as promising group curricula from which to choose, and that the majority also focus on trauma. So there's a bunch of references here, and you will have access to the slides when all of that gets posted. We also have a whole part of our website that is dedicated to mental health and substance use treatment and recovery support providers, as well as a part of our website that is dedicated to supporting survivors who are parenting, who are caregiving, and also their children. And then, just kind of clicking through some of the different resources on our website, my contact information. I want to say thank you, of course, and then open it up for some questions before we wrap up. Let's see. Just looking through the questions. So there's a question here of what would you say to individuals who are against MAT? MAT is a disqualifier in the program that I work. So here, I would really want to talk about where that kind of being against MAT, where that comes from for the person. Is that based on some, like a theoretical foundation? Is that based on, they're coming from a certain tradition, and so that's what they've kind of taken to be as like the truth? And then I would want to, as much as possible, generate a process that our services are based on science and that our services are based on research evidence. And what's been found time and time again is that, I remember reading one methadone study. It was one of the earlier studies in the 80s that they offered methadone to, that was the experimental arm of the study, and then there was a control arm of the study that did not have access to methadone. And that people in the control arm of the study that didn't have access to methadone were getting incarcerated and dying at such high rates that they actually, because of ethical and human rights mandates, had to stop the study and offer methadone to everyone in the study. So, we're not talking about things where the evidence is like, we're still wondering, we still need more research. No, the evidence is really clear and really decisive. And this also raises the importance of regulatory bodies to really both, to regulate that people not be disqualified for services from using that, but in fact, quite the opposite, that services should be mandated to provide information on MAT, should be mandated to learn about MAT themselves, and to support people in facilitating access to MAT, as well as providing overdose prevention, education and counseling and access to naloxone, right? That this should be really the expectation of any kind of licensed service, and that we should then further incentivize that through carving out funding that really people are only going to be eligible for funding if they accept people who are on MAT, right? So all the different levers we have in a policy landscape to really drive the use of evidence-based practices, especially those that are life-saving, we really need to advocate both on the kind of within organization level as well as the community level. Because really this is coming from stigma, and this is a way that stigma is lethal. Thanks so much for your question. Yeah, and then someone also mentioned, I'm seeing this just now, but earlier in the session, talking about many of the unique risks that women face and the added stigma of being pregnant, and the added barriers of being pregnant and living with an opioid use disorder. Someone here wrote, how about the risk of having children taken away and being reported as using while pregnant? And I'm so glad that you raised that, and that absolutely is a huge barrier for women living with opioid use disorder accessing both treatment as well as prenatal care. And that we know that when there are mandatory reporting laws around use during pregnancy, that's associated with actually poor health outcomes, poor birth health outcomes, and that when we can help people to access the different resources that they need, including prenatal care, that birth outcomes are much improved. And so we really need to do a lot to address all of those barriers to people accessing prenatal care and treatment. And so I think a question that keeps coming up in all the different policy work that I do is, how can we create access to to the services that people need without kind of, kind of setting off a punitive process. And I also want to clarify and say that there are many child welfare services that are not punitive in their approach, and that there's Family First legislation, there's intact family services, there are places that have created, different tracks that are really not about, family separation, but are about wrapping services around the family. And so, I want to also be clear in saying that there's a lot at this point that we know about really good practice and being able to support mom and baby staying together, because we know that outcomes for mom and outcomes for baby are the best when they can stay together. So with that, I want to say thank you, everyone, and pass it back to Karina.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. We always enjoy having you on, and you always share awesome information with the group. And thank you for keeping up with those questions. It looks like you did a great job with answering them as they came along. I'm just going to go over some quick information on CEUs and that. So when we conclude today's webinar, your browser is going to take you to an evaluation on the Father's new website. If you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for this event, you must complete the evaluation. You will be prompted to register or sign in to complete the evaluation. You can register as a visitor at no cost. For CEs to be reported to CE broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. Again, if you've signed up for the webinar through WebEx and you haven't created a profile, you have to create a profile on our site, and then you can take the evaluation. After you register or sign in, you'll be directed onward to the evaluation, and you may consider using the same email address when you register for our webinars through the WebEx link when you set up your profile. This helps us connect your attendance to your profile. So you have to use the same email address as on your profile so that we can connect your attendance. You will also get a second opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email today. The sender will be Messenger at WebEx. Again, the evaluation closes at midnight on Friday, October the 16th. Once you complete the evaluation, you will get a confirmation that it has been submitted. And again, it can take up to 30 days. We have to wait till the evaluation closes before we can process any of your credits. So please be patient. Again, it can take up to 30 days after the evaluation closes. We do not email your statements of credit. Instead, after we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile. You would go to your profile and it will be under Content and Features in the Professional Development tab. Again, we do not email this. It's your responsibility to go in and print those. With that being said, Gabriella, we want to thank you again for your time today. And we also want to thank the audience for participating in today's webinar. And we would also like to recognize and thank especially the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health for funding today's education. Please have a great rest of your day and hold for the evaluation. Thank you.